winning strategy for a high GRE score. And before we dive into it, I just want to make sure that I'm not here on my own and you guys can actually hear me. So if you look on the right of your screen, there's a chat function. And if any of you could just tell me, Dave, we hear you, that would be great. And then we can proceed. So just want to make sure that that is the case. In the meanwhile, this is me. My name is Dave. I'm a senior tutor here at examPAL. Thank you, Ashwin. You even used the exact phrasing I used. It's very thoughtful. Thank you very much. Great. So, wow, caps lock. That's intense. I hope you don't hear me too loud. Great. So, you can hear me too, Priya. Thank you very much. All right, guys, great. So, we're going to talk about the winning strategy for a high GRE score. And before we dive in, I want to give you guys a brief introduction into who we are at examPAL and what we can do for you. So if you've signed up to this webinar, that means that you've already signed up and you have full access to all of our video lessons, or at least for a lot of them. And you probably know that our team is there to answer any questions you may have. So I want to tell you a little bit about who we are at examPAL. We at examPAL, we started off as teachers who understood that students all around the globe were paying too much and they were doing it for the wrong product. And the thing is, students only realize they're paying too much for the wrong product after they complete their preparation, when it's too late. So what are they missing? What we figured is something like this. You know that feeling when someone is explaining something to you and you just don't get it? We all know that feeling, right? So now imagine what it's like to prepare for admissions tests such as the GMAT, the GRE, or the SAT. The questions in these tests can have up to 10 different possible solution paths, and all you need to do is find the fastest one. And the thing is that students all around the world are bombarded with thousands of practice questions, tips, tricks, and shticks, which are there to help everyone in the same way. The thing is that there's no such thing as the explanation or the right way to solve a question. I've personally taught a lot of students from all over the world for years, and when a teacher comes to me and says, you know, how would you explain this one? My answer is, to whom? And that's really examPAL in a nutshell. Okay, we just don't just explain what makes the correct answer correct. We first ask ourselves, who are you? And at examPAL, we do three things that no one else does. We study the way that you think. We study the effectiveness of all different possible solution strategies. Your goal is to be fast and correct. And if there's a fastest way to solve a question, we're going to help you find it. And finally, using this information, our system finds the best way to solve each question. And when I say the best way, I mean the best way for you. And this is something that not even private tutors can do. Our technology means that we're actually with you in each and every question, from the basics right up to the really hardest ones. And when we offer you a solution strategy, we don't guess it works. We actually measure. Okay. Just to summarize, the pain that a lot of test takers feel when they try to solve tests. They spend a lot of time and money preparing for admissions tests, and they realize that regular courses are frustrating, are ineffective, and are also quite time-consuming. Okay? So what we've realized at examPAL is that it's all about what we call cognitive flexibility, mastering admissions tests. And this is what we're going to talk about today, actually. This is the topic of our webinar, cognitive flexibility. So if you're asking yourselves, you know, what does this term mean? Hold on to your seats, because this is what I'm going to explain in a few minutes. But basically, cognitive flexibility is our ability to change our set of tools very quickly according to the changes in the data that we're getting. Right? And in the GRE, we have harsh time constraints, and we have to move from algebra to geometry to word problems really fast. And So what we try and do in our course is not just provide you with the knowledge you need, but train you to find the fastest way to solve each question. So how do we do that real quick? Well, our process starts with interactive video lessons. While you study our course studies you. Meaning in the videos there are questions that you have to solve, and our system tracks with how if you get them right or not. And each topic starts with a short video teaser, usually pretty funny, and then goes on to an introduction that gives you all the basic tools you need, so all the fundamentals of what, like, the formulas you need to know, and then moves on to a lesson in which we demonstrate the different solution strategies, how you can actually go ahead and solve them. And then we move on to the practice, which is really our special sauce, which we're most proud of. So this starts each time with each session for each topic with a diagnostic phase, right? Why do we call it diagnostic? Because, as I mentioned, we found that there are a lot of different ways to solve each question often, but even though there are a lot, these different ways can be divided into 3 strategies: precise, alternative, and logical. And this is the PAL in examPAL. Okay, this question, for example, that you see on your screen, it can be solved logically by figuring out the ratio between the numerator and the denominator. It can be solved precisely by just simplifying the algebraic expression, or it can be solved alternatively by using simple numbers. And only one answer can be correct, but there are several ways to get to it. And if you feel like I ran through that a little bit too quickly for you, then don't worry, because we're going to talk a lot in the next hour about the PAL system and how we can implement it in cases such as these to solve things in more than one way. Okay? So following the diagnostic phase, we go on to the improvement phase, in which we focus on your level, what we've seen from the diagnostic that you're at, so you don't solve questions that are too easy for you, which is a waste of time, or too hard for you, which also isn't effective. And we find the best questions that are going to help you improve your skills, which means not just being adaptive, but like the test is, but actually finding which tools work best for you and which ones you need to improve on. And then comes the best part after that, which is the optimization phase. Okay, so we use all the knowledge we've gained from the first 2 stages. And in this stage, the questions you see and the solution strategies you see after each question are chosen to match your own personal needs. So in this example that you see on the screen, the system found 4 solution strategies ranked in order of relevance to the user. Okay, so in professional terms, what we do is called an open, semi-supervised recommendation system. But what this means in normal human terms is that move from just machine learning to machine teaching. We scan through the ideas of our students in order to find the one that is easiest for you to understand and implement. And we do this using data from our over 50,000 students from 156 countries, which help us teach you. And the results are amazing. We've gotten a lot of global awards and recognition for education, innovation, and artificial intelligence. Our students are very enthused as well. And one last thing I'm going to mention, but certainly not least, is that we give you a real success guarantee. Up to 7 points on the GRE, and in our GMAT course up to 70. And the reason I say real is because we're not a place that where we measure improvement relative to a mock test that you do on the site. We don't know what you're doing. If you have a previous score from the actual test, you're not satisfied with an official score, we guarantee you're going to improve it significantly. All right? So bottom line, this is a chance for you to hop on to an offer we're offering to you, dear webinar listeners, which is 25% off of any and all of our GRE courses for the next 24 or 48 actually hours. So go to examPAL.com, take us up on it. You'll get an email after this webinar, so take us up on it there. All right, that's who we are, that's what we do, and now let's get down to our topic. How do we get a 160 or above on the GRE? Okay, and this webinar is really about the winning strategy to get a 160. So you may be hearing me say that and say something like, that's quite a promise there, Dave. You really telling me that just by watching this 1-hour webinar, all of us here are going to get really, really smart overnight and get a 160 or above? So my response to that is, first of all, the GRE isn't about being smart. And it's also not about knowledge. Sure, it helps to be smart, and it helps to have knowledge. Hey, Tomer, thanks for telling me. By the way, if you guys have questions as we go along, that's, of course, what the chat is there for. But so let me know. Anyway, what the GRE actually measures isn't smarts, it isn't knowledge, it's a skill. And skills, by definition, can be acquired and they can be perfected. So going back to our initial question, I'm not saying that all of you are going to get 160 tomorrow. Okay, each of us has a different starting point, and depending on our past experiences, on our talent, on our inclinations, on the speed in which we read, stuff like that. However, what I am telling you is we're here to make sure you get your best possible score and you get it quickly. So we're going to talk about what you must do in order to get a 160, and even more importantly, what you should not do in order to get there. Okay? So, for example, in contrast to popular belief, simply solving 10,000 or 5,000 practice questions actually won't really improve you and probably will do the opposite. Because solving that many questions is just exhausting. By the time you get to the test, you're going to hate it. I'm not saying you're going to actually like it in any other way or love it, but 10,000 is really, it's just too much and it's frustrating, okay? So what should you do? So we're going to talk today about two things. The first I've already mentioned, cognitive flexibility, and the second is rapid improvement. All right, so what is cognitive flexibility? Well, I already defined it for you. Cognitive flexibility is the ability to quickly find the fastest way to solve each question and to apply it, okay? So, so let's talk about the GRE and why this is true for it. So the GRE is different from most exams that we know from our bachelor's degree, from high school, from wherever. Why? Well, think about most tests that you've done so far. Usually, at least for me, I can tell you, most tests I've done required me to solve problems in a straightforward way, as in like read a question, comprehend the information, combine it with some memorized knowledge I have in my head, such as formulas and rules or dates and names if it's a verbal test, arrive at a precise solution and write it down. The GRE is different. Okay, as I already mentioned, prior knowledge isn't a factor. What is a really big factor is time. And because time is crucial, it's quite often the case that we should not solve the question from start to finish, but rather we should look for a quicker, less comprehensive way to do it. And this is where cognitive flexibility comes in. Okay? And this is what our unique PAL system is all about. So as I mentioned, we've figured there are 3 ways to solve each question, and I'm going to define them in a little bit more detail. So the first one, the P in the PAL, is precise. And this means using the information in the question to arrive at the exact answer using high school methods, abilities, such as an equation, simplifying it, or applying a grammatical rule, something like that. The second tool is called alternative, and this means basically taking a shortcut, okay? Using tools that are going to get us quickly to the answer, even if we can't tell how we got there precisely. This can be anything such as using the answers, estimating the result, relying on geometric symmetry, and many more. What binds these together is that you can implement them, you can get to the answer, and you can say, I'm not even sure why this is right, but I got to it quickly, I'm marking it, and I'm moving on. And finally, a lot of questions can be solved logically by implementing some kind of logical rule from outside, which we know from outside the question, and using it to shed light on the question and get us to the answer real quickly. So we have these three strategies, and now you may be asking yourselves, when do we apply which one? So what we've found is that there's no quick or simple answer to this, but rather it's a decision to be made on a question-by-question basis. Unfortunately, if there were a quick and easy answer, perhaps this webinar would be shorter. I'd just tell you guys, you know, questions that have to do with fractions, solve them precisely. Questions that are about circles, solve them alternatively, and it would be pretty simple. But it's not like that. So if we have to choose each question, what are we asking ourselves? So the first thing has to do with the question itself. Okay, what does the question ask us to do? How long do we think a precise solution will take to perform on this question? Does it look like an estimation is likely to be helpful to save time? Is it even possible? Are there any verbal cues in it that hint that we can use logic? Anything like that? And it also depends on our own personal strengths and weaknesses. Say we know that we're really, really good at using business logic for questions that have to do with buying and selling and prices, so we can implement that. The thing is, though, in order to really figure out how we do with each of these three strategies, precise, alternative, and logical, we need to first get actually familiar with them and use them. You know, I don't expect any of you to really know. You might think to yourself, oh, I'm good at precise, but once you actually start solving, maybe you'll learn that, you know what, actually, all things being considered, alternative is a lot of the time more efficient for you, even if you intuitively think something else now. So the point is, you need to get to know them, you need to use them, and only after that can you really make an educated decision about what tool you're going to use. Okay, so all of this has sort of been the introduction to explain the basis of our strategy, and now we're going to look at some examples. Okay, and actually implement together the PAL system and talk about how we are going to use these questions, how we're going to solve them. So let's start with the first question. And I'm going to put it on your screen now, guys, but I'm just telling you right now because I know we are trained to really go ahead and if we see a question to start solving it. This isn't what I'm asking you now. I want you to just look at this question, and rather than solve it, I want you to tell me, how do you think we should solve it? Should we use precise, alternative, or should we use logical? Okay, so take a look at the question and tell me what you think. I'm going to read it aloud, and then we're going to take a quick little poll about how we should solve it. So, of the 900 guests that attended a wedding, 36% were women. If 450 men left the wedding, the women would be what percentage of the remaining guests? So, tell me, guys, how do you think we should solve this question? Should we use precise? Should we use alternative? Should we use logical? Or do you not know? You should be seeing on your screen a poll option now. And just vote based on what you saw. And if you don't know, that's all right. But let me know what you think. Because really a lot of this is about, and if you feel like I haven't given you enough time to decide, well, that's kind of the point. Because on the test, we're going to have to make these decisions really, really quickly. Tamer, that's great if you think precise, but also make sure you actually vote in the poll. I'm going to give you guys a few more seconds because some of you haven't voted yet. But you know, just tell me what you think. All right, and that's enough of you, I think. Let's wrap it up. So you should be seeing the results on your screen. Interesting, mixed. We got at least one vote for each of the options. A small majority or plurality, I should say, for logical. Interesting. Actually, I have to admit, I'm surprised. I was expecting, often precise is what most people say. So that's interesting. So let's actually talk about it. So first of all, let me just say right off the bat, those of you who marked precise are definitely not incorrect. Basically, all quant questions can be solved precisely. There is enough data here for us to get to a precise answer. And let's actually look how that looks like. So we can figure out that 36% of 900, we can simplify that. That's 36 over 100 times 900, which, taking off the zeros, leaves us with 36 times 9, which is kind of hard to calculate in our head, so we'll just instead do 36 times 10 minus 1, which gives us 360 minus 36. And that's 324. That's the number of women in the wedding, right? Moving on, we have 450 men left in the wedding. So 900 of all the people minus 450 men means that there are 450 guests remaining. And we have to figure out the percentage of the women of the remaining guests. So that's 324 out of 450, which is a fraction. Again, one that's a bit hard to work with. We can simplify it by taking out 3 from both sides, from the denominator and the numerator, that is, which gives us 108 over 150, which we can then, once again, simplify by dividing by 3 into 36 over 50, which we can then multiply to 72 over 100, giving us 72%. So this works. This is how to do it. And again, and if I did this a little bit too quickly for you, don't worry about it, because you will get to your email recording of this webinar after, so you'll be able to review everything I said and the question itself at your leisure. But bear with me now. We all agree that this is a possible way to solve it. However, this really is a lot of work. Okay, I had to write a lot of things down here, and even just saying it out loud and kind of skimming over the details, it took me a little bit of time to explain it to you. And so the question is if there is a more efficient way to solve it. And those of you who guessed logical were thinking in the right direction, in my opinion. So let's think of how we can do that using a totally different approach. So remember, what is percentage? Percentage is a part over a whole, right? And in this case, we're looking at the women out of all of the guests after the men leave, that is, right? So since 450 men left, which is exactly half of 900, that means that all of the guests that we're looking at, the population is half of the guests. But the women didn't leave. The women are the same number of women, right? 36% in the beginning, and the number of women actually stayed. So what does that mean? It means that logically, if the same number of women stayed, but the total, the bottom part of the fraction, that is, sorry, the guests divided by 2 became half, that means that logically the percentage must double itself. So if we're 36 before, we're going to be 72% now. And that's the answer. We don't have to do any calculations, no subtraction, no addition, and no division, which is really the hardest part. But just say to ourselves, logically, if there were 36% and then the entire population halved itself, then that means that we're going to be double that percent, 72%. So, and actually, here's some the data on this from our site. The people who solve it using precise, the ones who get it right, it takes them on average 2.5 minutes, which is longer than we have. On the GRE, we have about 2 minutes to solve each quant question, whereas people who use it logically, it takes them a little bit less than 2 minutes, which is where we need to be. So that's pretty significant. If we solve all questions in 2.5 minutes, we're just not going to have enough time. We're going to have to guess a few questions or leave them blank. And if we solve everything in less than 2 minutes, we are going to have time for everything. So I hope that was clear. Tell me if you have any questions about it. But this was an example of a case in which, while precise works, as it always does, it is not the most efficient tool, but rather using logic was more efficient. So if you're all right with it, we're going to move on now and look at a different question. So here we go. Once again, I want you to not solve the question. I want you to think about how we should solve it. So let's talk about it. 2 printers run simultaneously. An inkjet printer that prints at a uniform rate of 80 pages every 15 minutes, and a laser printer that prints 100 pages every 10 minutes. How many minutes will it take for them to print 230 pages? So once again, I want you guys to tell me, how do you think, what do you think is the most efficient way to solve it? You guys, hold on. I'm going to ask you guys the same question again, and just, you know, tell me what you think. Is it precise? Is it alternative? Is it logical? Interesting. The early voting. I feel like you guys are putting a lot of stock in the last question to kind of guide your responses so far. And I'll explain what I mean in a second when I reveal the votes. So I'm going to give you guys 5 more seconds, and then I'll wrap it up. Okay, so this is pretty interesting. You see the results on your screen. Basically, all of you, or the vast majority, I should say, think the answer is logical, which is interesting. I'll say this. If you guys leave this webinar thinking that logical is a useful tool and actually trying to implement it often, then, you know, as far as I'm concerned, I've done my part, because logical is a very useful tool and it's definitely underused by most students. However, I do suspect that you're a bit influenced by how I solved the last one. So anyway, let's talk about it. Okay, so here I'm going to give you an example of how we can solve it using actually the second answer strategy, which is alternative, which, remember, is a lot about using shortcuts. All right, so one alternative we can use is using the answers, right? We have 5 answer options, and one of them is definitely right. So we can just take one of them, say, let's check this one, and solve according to it. So we're asked how many minutes it'll take on this 230 pages, and instead of thinking ourselves how many minutes and arriving at an answer precisely, let's just take 10 minutes, which is answer A, and let's see what happens if that were the case. So if it takes 10 minutes, so we know that printer 1 printed about 60 pages, right? Because 2 printers run simultaneously, an inkjet printer that prints at a uniform rate of 80 pages every 15 minutes, and a laser printer that prints 100 pages every 10 minutes. So how do we get to 60 pages? We're saying instead of 15 minutes, it's just 2/3 of that, 2/3 of 80. It's not exactly 60, but another alternative thing we can do is use approximation. So again, printer 1 printed around 60 pages. How about printer 2? Well, here we know exactly. They were told they printed 100 pages every 10 minutes, so they printed exactly 100 pages. That gives us together roughly 160 pages. Now, even though this isn't a precise and accurate estimate, it's definitely far enough from 230 in order for us to definitively rule out this answer choice. Okay? And we know that we're going to need something that's a lot bigger. However, well, I shouldn't say a lot. We know we're going to need something that's bigger, but not twice as much, not 3 times as much. So while we're going to rule out A, 10, we're not going to go for E, 30, and we're not going to go for D, 20 either. We're going to go for either B or C, which are closer options. In fact, if the answer options here were a little bit further apart, if, say, C was 20 and D was 25 and E was, larger than that, I would at this point already eliminate C, D, and E and just pick B, because it's something that's closer to 10, but it's not twice as big. It's definitely not going to be something that's twice as big. However, B and C here are pretty close, so we're going to have to look at both of them or at one of them to determine. So let's look at B. Say it took 15 minutes. So here, we actually know exactly how much printer 1 did, because, again, we're told 80 pages every 15 minutes. And for printer 2, we're going to have to do the work ourselves, but it's pretty easy, because going from 10 minutes to 15 minutes means going from 100 pages to 150 pages. No need for estimation. And that gives us exactly 230 pages. This is the answer, no question. So again, here we didn't use logic, not really, and we didn't try and solve precisely, which again, as before, would have been possible, but would have taken us longer than this, for most people at least. But simply using the answers, we eliminated one by actually solving it and seeing that it's wrong, but we eliminated another few, at least 2, D and E here, just by using the first answer and seeing that there's no way that they could be correct, that they're too far off. And we just had to solve for 2 out of the 5, and this is often the case. Tamara, you're asking, does it consider a plug-in method instead? Well, I'm not entirely sure I understand the question. Perhaps you could elaborate on it, but I will say another alternative tool is one that we use when we have variables. When the question asks us about X and Y, one thing we can do, always basically, is plug in numbers for X and Y on our own. Say to ourselves, well, what if X were 1 and what if Y were 2? And this is if the answers also have variables such as X and Y. And then when we plug in those same numbers for the answer choices, we're going to look for the one that gives us the same result as before. And also, if we have numbers in the answer choices but variables in the question, we can, the same way we did here, we can use the answer choices and plug them in instead of the X and the Y. So here, we use the answers to get to the solution. As you're asking, this was the alternative tool we used. So I hope I've convinced you guys that the PAL system has its merits in the quantitative section, and that there's a lot of benefit in not simply solving everything straightforwardly in a precise way. However, in the time we have remaining, I want to convince you that this is also true for the verbal section, just as much. Here too, every question can be solved precisely, alternatively, or logically. So let's see what I mean. The interview is an essential part of a successful hiring program, because with it, job applicants who have personalities that are unsuited to the requirements of the job will be eliminated from consideration. This argument logically depends on which of the following assumptions. Once again, I don't want you guys to even read the answer choices. Maybe you did already, but I don't want you to. And I'm going to ask you now, how do you think we should solve this? And once again, if you feel like you don't have enough time, that's kind of the point. You have to make these choices very quickly. So, what do you guys think? Logical, precise, or alternative? And it's true we haven't yet discussed what these strategies really mean in the verbal, but we're going to do that in a second. So just kind of intuitively tell me how you think we would solve it. So, interesting so far. I'll just say so far, actually, I'll say now what I in general even mean by using these different strategies. So precise is pretty straightforward. It means using the information that the question gives us and figuring out the answer all on our own. We don't even have to look at the answer choices in order to figure out what the answer is, or at least a lot about the answer. Logical means doing something similar, but it also involves implementing a rule from outside, a logical rule that we've already learned before that has to do with just some kind of even common sense, and implement it in order to solve the question. Alternative, on the other hand, is sort of being blind. Alternative is just using the answer choices one by one and going over them and using the process of elimination. So you guys, interestingly, here also, none of you went for the precise. Some went for the alternative, and a majority went for logical, which again is interesting. And again, I'm pretty happy to see. So if you guys leave here using logical, I'm pretty happy. But let's talk about it if you guys were right or not. So I asked you guys not to read all the questions because we don't have enough time. And again, you'll be able to go over it at your leisure later. But if we were to read all the questions, we would see that they're all convincing here. Why is that? Why are they all convincing? Well, because all these questions give us a lot of good advice about how to be a great manager. Okay, so if you look at answer A, a hiring program will be successful if it includes interviews. I mean, yeah, that makes sense. Probably you need to interview them, and you need to hire people. In order to hire people, sorry, you need to interview them. A makes sense on its own. Okay, the same thing is true for D. Let's look at D. The only purpose of an interview is to evaluate whether job applicants' personalities are suited to the requirements of the job. So that pretty much just gives us the definition of an interview. And it's obviously true, or at least it isn't obviously untrue, so we can't eliminate it. What about E? The fit of job applicants' personalities to the requirements of the job was once the most important factor in making hiring decisions. So I don't actually know if this is true or not, that it was once the most important. But again, it's not something that I can eliminate. It definitely could be true. It makes sense. So the point here is that these sounded good, but I contend that we didn't actually need to read them at all. And in fact, it's kind of a waste of time and even a bit of a mistake to read them at all. Reading them, again, is what I would term the alternative approach in verbal, just going over each one and trying to eliminate. What we could have done here is use the precise approach, taking information from the question and trying to figure out what it tells us. So let's see. We know here, the question is saying, looking at the first sentence, that interviews are good. Why? Because they eliminate candidates whose personalities aren't suited. So what does this tell us? It tells us two things. It tells us about the hiring process itself and about the interview tool specifically. First of all, it tells us that interviews are about eliminating unsuitable applicants. Okay, this is why we use interviews, right? And if you look at the words that I marked here, these are really the key words, the important ones. The interview is essential because it eliminates applicants, because applicants will be eliminated. This, when we boil it down, is really what this is telling us and what it's based on. And if we now go and read the questions over, now that we have this information in our back pocket, then when we get to answer C, interviewers can accurately identify applicants whose personalities are unsuited to the requirements of the job, then we can actually think about the fact that this is indeed an assumption which is necessary for the claim made here that interviews are essential because they eliminate unsuitable applicants, right? In order for interviews to be a good thing because they eliminate unsuitable applicants, it has to be the case that interviews can actually do that they can actually accurately identify the applicants that are suitable and the ones that aren't suitable and eliminate them on the basis of that. So the point here is that the precise tool is useful and actually often underutilized in the verbal section. And the mistake that we make when we tend to use alternative, which is just using the answers one by one, and this is, at least is the case for most students that I've encountered, that most of us in verbal tend to do this, is twofold. First of all, it just takes too much time. I don't need to tell you guys, verbal is pretty tough in this test, and we just don't have enough time. And if we read all the questions and all the answers, we're simply not going to have enough time to solve all the questions. We're not even going to have enough time probably to read all the questions. We might have to skip some questions entirely, and we don't want to do that. The second thing is actually even a little bit more pernicious than that, and that's the GRE is counting on you to read all of the questions, and they've designed them to be confusing. It's sort of like, imagine you need to solve a riddle, and instead of thinking on your own what's the answer to this riddle, you have 5 really convincing and talented actors come up to you, and each one gives you a different explanation. And it can be really, really confusing because, once again, as we saw here, they're not necessarily saying things that are ridiculous. They're not even necessarily saying things that are wrong. Some of the answers are going to say things that are correct in and of themselves. They're just not the answer. They're not actually answering the question. So the point is that going the alternative route can lead us on a wild goose chase and can waste a lot of time, whereas using the precise tool can often be very useful. However, I'm not trying to say verbal, go precise. Again, that's not the case. It's a question-by-question basis. When there's enough information in order to do this kind of thing, that's when we use precise. When some kind of logical rule is relevant, such as we're talking about averages, we're talking about something we know a logical rule about, we'll go logical. And when all else fails, when these things don't work, that's when we should use the alternative tool in the verbal. So this was the first part of our webinar about cognitive flexibility and our PALgorithm. And now I want to talk about something else, about the second thing that I said that 160 scorers do well and do better than other people, and that's rapid improvement. So before I talk about this topic, let me introduce it. There's a common phenomenon that happens in GRE studies, which is demonstrated in this graph. Maybe you've already understood it from looking at the graph, but let me describe it. We call this phenomenon plateauing. And what this means is that students at the beginning of their studies keep getting better and better, right? And they do so actually really, really quickly. And they're on the far left side over here of the graph. They're really improving. The results are jumping by a lot. But suddenly they stop. They slow down, and then they stop entirely. They reach a plateau, and after that, additional practice only yields time after time the same results. Now, what's happening here is that up to a certain point, improvement is natural. The GRE section of our brains, if you will, is like a muscle. It gets stronger with use. However, this can only go so far. At a certain point, you will have learned all the material. No more material to learn. You will have known you already know all the formulas. No formulas to go. And your question-solving ability will have reached a natural limit, right? Eventually, we're not going to be able to read much faster, not without at least, really doing a lot of practice. But we have natural limits to our abilities, what I'm trying to say. And it's at this point where improvement becomes much, much harder. So what 160 scorers managed to do is to cross this plateau and continue to improve. So how do they do that? What is needed to improve once you already know the basics and are at a high level? So the first thing is research and implementation. Okay, no one likes to get questions wrong. Let me tell you, least of all me. But a good improver seizes mistakes and treats them as learning opportunities. The key is, after each mistake, asking yourself, why did I get this wrong? Was it professional? Did I just not know the material well enough? And if so, that means go back and study it. If you don't know the Pythagoras theorem well enough, go back and study it till you do. Was the problem technical? Did I simply mess up and do something small and silly? And the tell about on this one is that you solve a question, you get it wrong, and then you look at the explanation and you say to yourself, oh, okay, I knew that. I knew the answer. That doesn't really count. It's a silly mistake. It doesn't really count. But actually, these are the ones that we can improve on the easiest, okay? This can be, and there's often really simple tips or techniques we can adopt that can help us avoid these. Something like writing down the answer choices on our page and crossing them out, writing down a formula at the beginning of the section, and so on. Finally, was the problem strategic? For example, did I choose the wrong PAL? Did I choose alternative when I should have gone precise? And did I waste a lot of time? So if that's the case, we need to figure out what about the question made you pick the strategy you did, and what about the question made a different strategy be the right strategy, which you didn't pick, and how you're going to identify next time when you see a similar question which is the right strategy for you. And it can be pretty specific. It can be, okay, I've realized that when a question, involves the Pythagoras theorem, it takes me too long to write it out and they're precise. In these cases, I should use alternative. That's just a silly example. But the point is that there's no one size fits all answer, and it's something that you have to figure out on your own. All right? So whichever way it is, after you've analyzed your mistake, you go and seek out similar questions in order to see that you implement the conclusion. Okay? And finally, after that, you should write down all these conclusions in a kind of a running list of mistake types. Have different types of mistakes, an example of a question where you made the mistake, and the conclusion, the tip. What am I going to do to avoid this mistake? All right? Ask yourself after every mistake, why did I do it? And so the main reason that examPAL students reach higher scores faster is, I would say, that our system is sort of plateau proof. Why? Well, you always know what you did wrong, and you're told what you can do better next time. During the improvement and the optimization sections of each practice, you're going to research everything you've done as a matter of habit, both your strengths and weaknesses. You do this because that's what the system feeds you. And you get notes on how to be aware of similar cases and what to do in them. Okay? And the system chooses the best next questions in order for you to practice, the exact points you need to work on and suggest the solutions that best match your own way of thinking. So let's talk about what a good study plan should look like. And I'm going to go over this pretty briefly. We actually have a whole other webinar next week about building a GRE study plan. So when you want more details, join us there. But just in general, this is what we think a winning study plan looks like using the examPAL course. So 6 to 8 weeks of study over which you study roughly 120 hours. Okay? So do the math. If you can fit 120 hours into less time, you can do it 6 weeks. If you can fit into a bit more time, do it 8 weeks. But this is the recommended amount of time. That's if you're a native English speaker. If you're not a native English speaker and you need to improve your verbal skills, then you should add another 30 hours. So make that roughly 150 hours, which include 30 hours of just working on your basic verbal skills, not solving verbal questions on the test, but actually, going over English language rules and stuff like that, which we also have information on. We always also have that study material on the site, of course. So the breakdown of this is 20 hours of going over the intro videos, which means you're going to learn the fundamentals. Then another 20 hours of going over the lessons, learning how the PAL system solves them. 30 hours using the practice technology, the PALgorithm to learn and to implement what you've learned. And 30 hours of doing practice tests, the official ETS practice tests, using the official guide and revisions, and another 20 hours on improving your verbal abilities. Again, 50 hours if you're a non-native English speaker. Okay? So that's how you do it on the site. Basically, how this goes is for the first 50 days or so, you follow the course trail on the site. It tells you what to do, and we recommend sticking to this agenda because oftentimes it teaches you fundamentals you need to know before it teaches you things that use them later. So it makes sense to use it. If you're doing it in this amount of time, in 6 to 8 weeks, which we recommend, so that gives you about 2 days per topic on the site. So 2 days to work on text completion, in which on the first day you can go over the basic material, the videos, and on the second day you can use the practice and implement it. Again, depending on your schedule, but this is roughly what we recommend. All right? Aside from that, also incorporate into your daily schedule an hour to an hour and a half of reading. Read something good, some high quality periodical in English, of course, and take a day off. That's important. Don't work 7 days a week. Take a day off. It helps. Tamer is asking, could you please add to your preps next week what may be the best book that you prefer to use? Okay, yeah, we will talk a little bit about which books you can use. I'll give you a short answer now, though. We recommend using the official book put out by the ETS. And aside from that, we don't recommend using books. We recommend using online automated courses. And the way you could use that book is to seek out questions seek out questions on material that you need to work on. And the last 10 days of your 2-month study plan should be given over to reviewing the material, by which I mean you do practice tests. So every other day do a practice test, and then analyze them, use them as learning tools. And then the next day, do a review of the things that you've learned in the test that you need to work on. So do a test, say to yourself, oh, I really see I need to work on text completion questions, and then spend the next day working on that, or something like that. All right, and as I mentioned before, you really want to keep an error log of all the mistakes that you're making, and you want to keep it updating, and solve fast, skip slowly. Okay, by which I mean ask yourself, solve the question as fast as you can, but don't move on. Even if you've gotten it wrong, ask yourself why I got it wrong. If you've gotten it right, ask yourself, was this the best way to get it right? It's very possible to get it right and still realize that you should have solved it differently. And that's what the PAL system is all about. And finally, day before the test, take a day off. You've earned it. And on the last day, crush the GRE. So, to summarize what I've been trying to say in the past hour, 160 scorers are not different than you or I. Okay, they understand what the GRE wants from them, and they use these different tools: cognitive flexibility, focused rapid improvement, and winning study plan to get to where they are. But since these are all acquired skills and not innate skills, we can adopt them. And if we work hard, pretty soon we'll be able to join the 160 club, and other people may be asking about us, what is it that makes us different? So that is basically what we have to go over today. And again, I want to thank you guys for joining me. We have a special offer just for you guys for the next 48 hours, 25% off any and all of our GRE courses. Go to examPAL.com and take us up on it. And if you do that, then I'll hopefully see you there, because I and the other tutors are always on site answering questions. In fact, you can go there now even without signing up and ask us a question in the chat bubble, and we'll happily answer. So take us up on that. I hope you guys enjoyed this. I hope to see you also in one of our future webinars. As I mentioned, there's one next week. And I hope to see you on examPAL.com. I'm going to sign off now, or at least I'm going to turn off my microphone because I'm all out of talking. But if you guys have any questions, then I'm going to stick around for a few more minutes and try to answer them. And after that, I'll bid you guys adieu and hopefully see you soon. So thanks for being with me. If you have any questions, let me know. And see you on examPAL. Priya. So Priya asks, do we have a 1-month study plan, or do we recommend a 2-month study plan? The answer is yes. Both of these things are true. We do recommend a 2-month study plan, and we do also have a 1-month study plan. Again, if you go to our webinar next week, we'll explain in detail why we recommend a 2-month study plan, but also explain in detail how, if you choose to do a 1-month study plan, if you have to, or for some reason prefer, how to do so. And both, of course, are compatible on examPAL, and also a longer 3-month study plan also. We have one. So the answer is yes.